You don't belong here." The words hit like a slap, dripping with venom as they left the mouth of the bar owner, his fingers stabbing toward the door. Kellen Brooks didn't flinch. He stood still, quiet as a ghost, his untouched beer sweating on the table beside him. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made a scene, hadn't even spoken more than 2 words since entering. But it didn't matter. "Too loud?" Kellen finally said, voice cool even. "I haven't even taken a sip." The man behind the bar only grunted and jabbed a thumb toward the exit. "Out, before I make you regret staying." By the next afternoon, as the place braced for its usual early evening crowd, the front door opened with a chimney and in stepped not one, but a dozen formidable figures. Each of them carried the same unmistakable weight as Kellen disciplined, aware, lethal. They weren't just any group. These were his people. Kellen Brooks was still learning how to live on the outside. After 15 years as a covert operative in the Navy's most classified unit, the world he'd returned to felt strangely artificial. The noise of normal life, meaningless chatter, soft routines was more jarring than the chaos of enemy fire. War had forged ironclad bonds, scars both visible and buried, and now, discharged with honor after an injury that left a permanent limp in his stride, he was a soldier without a war. He'd chosen the quiet, salty village of Crestford Covia Coastal Dot, on the map where the breeze whispered instead of roared in hopes the waves might silence the unrest within. But Kellen didn't fit the Hollywood fantasy of a special ops warrior. He wasn't hulking or loud, medium build, eyes like polished stone, posture unnervingly straight. His presence was restrained, calculating every motion precise, every silence deliberate. To the average passerby, he was just another man in simple clothes with a haunted air. But to anyone with a sense for it, he was something else entirely. He'd walked into the Rusty Gull, a small bar wedged between a bait shop and a trinket store that sold seashells dipped in gold paint. It was popular with beach tourists on weekends, mostly for its open mic and overpriced cocktails. But this was a sleepy Tuesday, and the bar was mostly empty, save for a few old men swaying quietly with their beers and regrets. Kellen picked a table near the far wall, requested a dark ale, and leaned back, watching, always watching, a reflex, not a choice. The Rusty Gull's owner, Hank Delaney, was a heavy-set man with a gut like a keg and a face permanently twisted in irritation. He liked to call himself old school, but in truth, he was just mean. His rules weren't written down, because they changed depending on how threatened he felt by whoever walked in. And for some reason, military men rubbed him wrong. Years ago, a skirmish with a pair of cocky sailors left him with a broken nose and a lasting grudge. Since then, any customer with a certain build, haircut, or posture made him uneasy. And if that customer also happened to be black, Hank's discomfort turned toxic. Kellen Brooks was the full package of Hank's unspoken fears. Tall, dark-skinned, silent, and disciplined. When Kellen walked through the door, Hank noticed instantly. It wasn't what he did, it was what he didn't do. No loud entrance, no swagger, just a silent sweep of the room with those steady eyes. That's all it took. Hank didn't see a veteran or a tired man looking for a drink. He saw a threat, an intruder, someone who didn't match the friendly tourist vibe he was trying to keep. For 15 long minutes, Kellen sat without a word, sipping slowly, staring at the old faded map of the coastline hanging behind the bar. That's when Hank approached. Arms folded across his chest, a performative snarl on his face. "All right, pal," he barked, unnecessarily loud in the hushed room. "You've been sitting here, staring like a statue. You planning something?" Kellen looked up, calm. "Just thinking, enjoying the quiet." "Thinking, huh?" Hank repeated, his lip curling. "Yeah, I don't like that kind of thinking in here. Makes people nervous." He shot a dramatic glance around the bar, but the other patrons pretended not to hear. Hank stepped closer. "Your kind's always thinking too much, plotting. Doesn't belong here." His voice dropped, thick with contempt. Kellen's brow lifted slightly. "My kind?" A subtle warning glinted in his eyes, though his voice remained level. Hank leaned in close, breath heavy with beer and bitterness. You military types always come in with your attitude, acting like you're above everyone else. And let's not pretend I don't know how this goes. Folks like you think you can just walk in anywhere, mix in where you're not wanted. Well, not here. Kellen didn't move. I haven't said a word to anyone but the bartender. I've been sitting, quietly. Doesn't matter, Hank snapped. I know you're kind. I've seen it before. Don't need trouble. I run a clean bar. And with that, Hank turned and stomped off, convinced he'd won something. The words burned deep, not for their volume but their familiarity. It wasn't the first time Kellen had been dismissed for the color of his skin, for the uniform he no longer wore. But this time, something was different. Something had shifted. As the sun dipped behind the ocean that night, Hank Delaney had no idea that his small-minded aggression had just rung a silent bell that would echo far beyond his dingy little bar. Because when you've trained with warriors who crawl through fire and disappear into shadows, you don't answer insult with noise. You respond with precision. You respond with force. And most importantly, you respond when they least expect it. If you've ever seen someone judged by the way they look, or dismissed because of what they've survived, stick around. You're about to see what happens when loyalty runs deeper than blood, and when brotherhood answers a silent call. Kellen walked back to his small second-floor rental that night, the taste of quiet rage still lingering like rust in his mouth. He'd grown up in Georgia, where racism didn't always shout, it whispered, slid its fingers along the edges of daily life. But this was different. This felt like an invitation. In the dim light of his apartment, he pulled out a battered old phone. It took a moment, but muscle memory guided his fingers to the encrypted app buried deep in the system. A secure line used only for urgent matters, and only by those who knew how to listen. SEAL Group 6, his brothers. He typed a short message. Rusty Gull, Cresford Cove. Owner, Hank Delaney. Racially targeted, a veteran. Just a heads up. Then he hit send, without another word. Kellen hadn't asked for backup. He hadn't requested justice. This wasn't a call for vengeance, it was simply a data drop, the kind of passive signal he'd mastered during years of covert fieldwork. A quiet ping in the network that let the right people know where the problem lived. Back at the Rusty Gull, Hank Delaney was nursing his ego with shots of bottom-shelf bourbon and spite. The nerve of that guy, he grumbled, waving a glass at his hired muscle. Walks in like he's earned a seat at the table. Across the bar, lounging like a shadow, was Royce's so-called security. A former cage fighter turned bar enforcer, Royce carried the same chip Hank did, just with more scars and less thought. He grinned, his busted lip tugging awkwardly. They always think they're special, especially the ones with uniforms and attitude. Hank made a vague, dismissive gesture, careful not to say the quiet part out loud. They want to take over everything, not in my bar. Royce gave a nod of agreement, the long gash across his left cheek twitching with every movement. You did right kicking him out. Guys like that only speak one language force. The next morning, at precisely 5:30 a.m., the time that had been Kellen's natural wake-up for over a decade, his phone buzzed once. Kellen. The voice was unmistakable. Commander Elias Rivas, his old team lead, the man whose word once meant life or death in the field. Commander, Kellen responded instantly, already sitting upright, pulse steady. I saw your message, Rivas said. Had a few calls with the crew. A pause followed, heavy with implication. We're intrigued by this establishment you mentioned. Kellen blinked, surprised by the interest. Sir, I wasn't trying to escalate. When one of ours gets hit, Rivas cut him off. We all feel it. Besides, his voice took a calculating turn. Most of the units being transferred to Ashridge Base. That's 30 minutes from Crestford. The proximity caught Kellen off guard. He hadn't known the team was relocating nearby. That's unexpected. Convenient, Rivas corrected, the word sharp and precise. We'll need a place to unwind. Something low-profile, beach access preferred. The Rusty Gull seems like a candidate. Kellen smirked faintly. You're going to assess the atmosphere? Exactly. Rivas' tone shifted into what Kellen remembered from Black Ops briefings. Cold, direct, and tactical. We plan to visit, See if the owner is welcoming to military guests. The grin touched Kellen's lips before he realized it. Understood. I'm in town tomorrow, Rivas added. Coffee at, 800. Portside Cafe. I'll be there, sir. The next morning, Rivas arrived like a storm behind closed doors. He wasn't wearing his uniform, but every inch of him screamed command. Broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, and with eyes that could make a grown man reconsider every decision he ever made. Kellen, he greeted, offering a firm handshake. Looks like civilian life has its own combat zones. After a brief exchange about life outside the wire, Rivas slid a file folder across the table. We ran some background on your friend, Mr. Delaney. Kellen opened the file. Inside, photos, city complaints, financial audits, licensing records, pages of it. How'd you pull this together so fast? Rivas gave a tight smile. You're not the only intel guy on the squad, Brooks. We've got friends in local agencies, code enforcement, tax offices, health department too. The folder read like a rap sheet disguised as paperwork. In the last 3 years, the Rusty Gull had accumulated 5 official discrimination complaints filed by active-duty black servicemen stationed at nearby bases. All 5 dismissed quietly, buried without action. There were also health violations, and curiously, they had all been resolved within days. Looks like Mr. Delaney's not just biased, he's connected, Rivas said, tapping one of the reports. Kellen flipped through the documents, his mind automatically spotting patterns, linkages, soft points. So this wasn't just one incident. It's a structure. Exactly, Rivas replied. Systemic behavior. Not a fluke. He pointed to a particular document near the bottom. And get this's liquor license? Due for renewal next week. Kellen's eyes narrowed. You're thinking of applying pressure? Not directly, Rivas said. Let's just say 6 members of our team are off duty tomorrow, and all of them are curious to see this charming little seaside bar for themselves. The smile that followed was one Kellen remembered from hostile terrain. It meant something was about to be dismantled. Cleanly. Thoroughly. Care to join us? Rivas asked. Kellen didn't answer right away, but when he did, it came with a calm nod. What's the dress code? Civilian casual, Rivas replied, draining his coffee. We're just ordinary men, looking to enjoy a drink. That evening, Kellen stood across from the Rusty Gull, watching through binocular vision. Hank Delaney leaned against the entryway, loud and boisterous, surrounded by patrons who looked just like him and likely thought just like him. Laughing, comfortable. Hank had no idea that his bubble of ignorance was about to be pierced by a precision strike disguised as a Friday night. What Hank Delaney didn't know, what he couldn't even fathom, was that he hadn't just offended a man. He had triggered a code of honor carried by some of the most dangerous and disciplined men alive. Operators who had moved silently through jungles, deserts, and war-torn cities were now about to run a quiet, devastating op in his backyard. Not for revenge, for justice. At 4:30 p.m. sharp on Friday, the Rusty Gull began to fill. Hank was in his usual post behind the bar, scanning the crowd with his typical mix of arrogance and suspicion. Royce lingered by the entrance, arms crossed, looking for faces that didn't fit. The door opened. Hank barely glanced up before his face stiffened. A black man stepped in, average height, calm. Kellen. Hank gave a sharp look to Royce, who immediately began to move, but then the door opened again. And again. And again. One by one, 12 men entered. All different shades and builds, but every one of them carried the same presence. Back straight, movement smooth, gaze steady. They weren't loud. They didn't swagger. But the room shifted. And Hank Delaney felt it even if he couldn't yet understand what was happening. 3 black, 3 Latino, 3 white, 3 more of mixed ethnicity. The dozen men who entered the Rusty Gull looked like a walking contradiction, diverse in origin, yet absolutely unified in purpose. Their presence didn't just shift the room, it froze it. Conversations tapered off like someone had turned down the volume of reality itself. Even the background music faded into irrelevance as an unseen tension took hold. Hank Delaney suddenly felt the temperature drop, not physically, but deep in his gutas. The 12 men moved through the bar with silent coordination, strategically placing themselves in a way that was anything but random. They weren't talking. They didn't need to. The regulars sensed something significant was underway, something that would be talked about long after the final drink of the night. Commander Elias Rivas walked up to the bar, cool as polished steel. "Mr. Delaney, I presume." The words were polite, but the tone behind them was carved in command. No room for interpretation. Hank's throat tightened. "Yeah, that's me. How can I help you?" "My name is Elias Rivas. These are my associates," he said, gesturing vaguely behind him. He didn't offer details. He didn't need to. "We're interested in your establishment. We've heard it has a particular preference in clientele." Hank's eyes darted to Royce near the door. The ex-fighter stood like a frozen statue, fully aware he was staring down professionals he had no chance against. "Two don't know what you're talking about," Hank stammered. "We welcome everybody here." "Interesting," Rivas said. His tone didn't shift, but his eyes hardened. He gave a nod. One of the men, tall, clean-shaven, sharp eyes, stepped forward and laid a folder on the counter. His nickname was Doc, and Frank would remember it for the rest of his life. "We have documentation that says otherwise," Doc said, flipping open the folder. Inside, 5 official complaints over the past 3 years, specifically from active-duty black service members. All dismissed. No follow-up. Doc turned the page. Also, a record of unresolved health code violations, all of which were mysteriously resolved within a week. Curious, isn't it? Hank's face blanched. "How did you?" "That's not important," Rivas interrupted flatly. "What is important is that last night you threw out a man who gave this country 14 years of his life, a man who's taken bullets in foreign deserts while you handed out watery drinks and insults in a beachfront dive." Rivas leaned closer. "And you did it for one reason, because he didn't look like the people you do serve." The realization hit Hank like a wave. These weren't just ex-military. These were SEALs, the top of the food chain, the ghosts who went where the fighting was fiercest and walked out alive. I think maybe this has been a misunderstanding," Hank croaked, his old bravado dissolving. "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Delaney," Kellen said, stepping forward from the crowd. His voice, calm but ice-edged, cut through the air. "You told me I wasn't welcome here, that people like me didn't belong. So I'd just like to clarify, what kind of people am I, exactly?" The silence was thunderous. Every eye in the bar locked on Hank. Phones were already raised, recording. No hiding this. A towering SEAL known as Tank stepped up next, his voice calm but impossibly heavy. "Mr. Delaney, your liquor license is up for review." Hank's knees nearly gave. "Coincidentally," Tank added, "my sister works at the Regulatory Commission. And my cousin?" He smiled faintly. "He writes for the Crestford Times. Loves stories about institutional discrimination." Hank swayed slightly, gripping the edge of the bar like it was the only thing keeping him upright. What do you want?" Rivas smiled, but it wasn't a smile of warmth. It was strategy. "We want a place to relax on weekends, somewhere that doesn't care what color our skin is, or whether we've worn a uniform." Doc slid another sheet across the bar. "We've taken the liberty of drafting a community accountability agreement. It includes a few items." Hank's trembling hands picked up the page. Mandatory anti-discrimination training for all staff. A public donation to local civil rights groups. A visible sign at the entrance committing to equality. A zero-tolerance policy for racial bias. All signed, sealed, and to be enforced by both social pressure and legal attention. This is blackmail," Hank muttered, though even he didn't believe it. "No," Kellen said quietly but firmly. "It's an opportunity. An opportunity to get ahead of the scandal, to avoid losing your license, to become better than you were yesterday." The room was still. Hank looked around for support. Royce wouldn't meet his eyes. The regulars just stared, silent. No one was coming to save him. "And if I say no?" he asked, one last pathetic spark of defiance flickering in his voice. "We're not here to threaten you," Rivas replied, smiling again. "We're just citizens. Citizens with influence, with contacts, and with a deep belief in justice." Hank understood now. These men didn't need fists or threats. Their presence alone was a tidal force. These were the kind of people who brought down warlords, who ended empires. And now, they'd set their sights on him. Hands shaking, Hank picked up a pen. The room burst into spontaneous applause as he signed. It was loud but not celebratory. It was acknowledgement, a release. And as the cheers faded, a single unspoken question lingered in the air. How do you rebuild something broken by hate? The answer began right there, in that bar, with a pen, with silence, with accountability. In the weeks that followed what locals began calling the Gull Reckoning, Cresford Cove began to change. The bar, once known for its quiet exclusivity, became the symbol of something else: progress. Hank Delaney kept his promises, not because he'd had a change of heart, but because he couldn't afford the alternative. The viral video, shared by at least 3 patrons, sparked a firestorm. Comments, outrage, petitions. Protesters lined the street outside the bar within 48 hours. The Liquor Control Board opened an immediate investigation into every previously closed complaint. The first public change was the new sign on the door, the Rusty Gull, where everyone belongs. This time, it wasn't just a slogan. Reality had forced Hank's hand. He honored the entire agreement. Sensitivity training mandatory, overseen by a regional civil rights group. A generous donation was wired to several inclusion-based nonprofits. Even Royce, his longtime bouncer, was swapped for a professional, diverse team trained in de-escalation, not intimidation.